At the far end is Megan O'Boyle. She's the director of the Phelan-McDermid Syndrome Foundation. Pat Furlong, the founder and president of the Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy, and Rich Moscicki, chief medical officer for Genzyme. And so these are some familiar faces that have been around and working in the rare disease arena. I'm happy particularly to have Rich here because we know that in a few weeks or so, he'll be coming to the other side called the government. So hold the booze and welcome, Rich. So thank you. About 3 years ago, we started talking in earnest about patient registry. We knew this was something that was very vital. We had considerable experience with our own rare disease clinical research network, just the contact registry. And so we thought about this, and we had several conferences, workshops to address the issue of patient registries. What were the needs? What were the problems and the issues? I wish I could say here 2.5 years later we have everything resolved. We don't, but we've made considerable progress, and I think what we've been seeing is this expanded interest by the entire rare diseases community, including the industry, the patient advocacy groups, the academic researchers, along with the federal authorities. I think the emphasis on the information that can be gathered from patient registries and natural history studies really becoming quite valuable as we begin to look at the various the various bits of information that are required moving into the clinical trial stage, so we can have a better understanding of the disease, have a better understanding of potential clinical endpoints that we need to incorporate into the clinical studies. And so over a period of time, and this is something we're seeing in our research network, that we are getting a better understanding of the disease. We're expanding the knowledge base about the diseases, the rare diseases that we have in our research network, and we're finding any of the research networks and individual consortia that focus on rare diseases after a period of time in which you have this high level of involvement of the patient advocacy community, you do really expand your knowledge base for the rare disorders. So I'm going to have the individuals here just the panelists just talk very briefly about what they're doing and their emphasis on patient registries, and then we'll get into some specific questions. And even though there isn't a tremendous amount of time here to focus on this, I think each one of us are available either after the session tonight or at any other time to call and talk about patient registries. And just to I'll just leave it at that because we can talk about, if we have enough time to talk about an update of the current status of the global rare disease patient registry data repository that Dr. Yafa Rubenstein, who's in the back of the room, Yafa just waved back there, hi, is responsible for this. And we're working with Patient Crossroads and Children's Hospital of Philadelphia to bring in multiple aspects of patient registries, including incorporation of electronic health record information directly into the patient registry. So a lot of different aspects of this, but I'm going to really now just turn it over to the other panelists to just give a very brief sketch of who they are, what they're doing, and their emphasis on the patient registries, and then we'll get into some other questions. Okay.
Thanks for sticking around. Being between now and happy hours, like being between now and lunch, so. My name is Megan O'Boyle. I'm with Phelan-McDermid Syndrome Foundation, and we are a small genetic cause of autism. And we know of 900 families diagnosed in the world. And we launched our patient registry, which patients, family members enter the data, not clinicians. And in 2 years, we have registered 570 patients of the 900 known families in the world. So we consider it a success. And we built our patient registry based on one that was designed by Duchenne. And you'll learn more through the questions, I guess.
So I'm Pat Furlong, and I represent Parent Project Muscular Dystrophy. PPMD was started in 1994, so we're a bit of an older, more mature organization. And 5 years ago, we started Duchenne Connect, which is a patient self-report registry. Today, we have about 3,200 entries, but this is a curated registry because we wanted this registry to be really rigorous so that it would be useful to many different people, to include industry and clinicians and certainly patients. patients are able to access the data, not only their own, but they are able to look through the data and understand, for instance, if you had an 8-year-old with Duchenne, you could look in and see how many 8-year-olds are on steroids, how many are on ACE inhibitors or beta blockers. So you could also derive some hope how many 8-year-olds are walking. So you could ask certain questions, and so we continue to grow the registry and find that it's a very valuable resource to the community at large.
I'm Rich Moscicki. I was the Chief Medical Officer at Genzyme. I was at Genzyme for 21 years. I just recently left Genzyme, and as Steve mentioned, in the near future I will be joining FDA. I speak neither for FDA nor really for Genzyme at this moment, but based only on my experience. So we began to have patient registries at Genzyme 21 years ago when I arrived. They have grown substantially during that period of time. Today, the Gaucher registry, for example, has about 5,000 patients entered into the registries. Now, there's a fundamental difference, I would probably say, between the purpose and the output of these registries that we had at Genzyme, in that they really are registries that were founded after approval of products, and in some cases prior to those approvals, but primarily outcome focused. And I think what we're talking about here is the ability to look at something substantially pre-approval, something that really can inform the development process, and maybe less so something that informs the outcome value process after a drug becomes available.
It's on? Okay, good. I did want to acknowledge, too, first, Jan Nakam, he didn't say too much about what Eurordis is doing as far as the patient registries and the other activities, but he's been doing a tremendous job in Eurordis around the world and in Europe, so thank you. I think we also have to acknowledge the work of NORD and the Genetic Alliance as well for their many activities related to patient registries. And I think we have heard, as a result of a recent workshop, maybe about a year ago, on natural history studies, that we're working with the Food and Drug Administration as well to develop procedures and guidance for natural history studies. So there's a lot going on with respect to this, and we will continue to solicit the input, especially of the industry and the research community. And then also for the patient advocacy groups, does this really make any sense, the types of questions? And so it is a major initiative, and I think as we get into it, it becomes more and more involved. So I think one of my first questions to the panel is, why should a rare disease group with very limited resources make the effort to create a registry? So we'll start.
I clearly got the wrong chair.
Yeah, we'll change direction then.
We're a young disease. 13 years ago, it was hard to even detect this syndrome. So we are still learning about our phenotype and genotype. So we wanted to learn more about the disease itself, and we wanted to collect data longitudinally. We want to return data to families so that we can empower them with information so that they can inform their non-informed clinicians. And we want to save researchers and pharmaceutical companies down the road lots of time and lots of money, because we want to be ready to go when they're ready to take us.
So we started a registry, first of all, because none existed in the United States. And we felt that the data that we could collect would be helpful to everyone, the patient community, as well as incentives for industry to conduct clinical trials in this space, because we would be able to provide them with a natural history of the patients. Patients, we knew, wanted to provide their data and wanted to talk about their disease, and we wanted to learn from them. We had hoped, and we still continue to hope, as you have heard about some of the opportunities we see in Duchenne, that the FDA would be willing to rely on natural history data, because the disease has a very specific progression. Granted, it's variable throughout, but we all know as parents what is going to end up happening. The boys are going to lose function. We consider those little deaths and ultimately die. And so to the degree that we could expedite the conduct of clinical trials, to the degree that we can expedite recruitment for clinical trials, we wanted to be helpful. And finally, it's a conversation with these parents, because we can engage them over time and continue to engage them. So if there's a need out there by industry or anyone else that they have a question that needs to be answered, we're ready and available to engage in conversation and survey those patients and provide the data.
So I'm a huge advocate of registries, and I really believe that they're invaluable. And I think the work that you're doing is a great example for those who want to have a possibility of a therapy for that group of diseases in the future. Irrespective of what I've done with registries, I would say I've developed a number of drugs in the rare disease space, and I think today we've heard from another group of people who are either doing so or have done so, and there's a recurrent theme. One is it's rare. It's hard to find these patients for clinical trials. So a registry that helps you identify patients interested in clinical trials is a very strong beginning. Secondly, there is no roadmap. We heard that before, right? Nobody's done most of these diseases before, so you can't look up the road of another antihistamine or another NSAID. So you have to identify an endpoint. You have to know the natural history. And while not every registry is going to be able to help you do that, but if they can, particularly the natural history, I think that's an enormous help.
Even though the diseases themselves may be rare, we often run into this situation where multiple individuals or groups want to form their own patient registry and not come into the fold. How do you deal with that, or have you run into this situation? We'll start down here, Richard. Megan, we're going to save you.
So we have the same problem on the other end of the spectrum, where each company might have its own outcomes registry for an approved drug and doesn't necessarily want to share. And I think that there's a certain power to a patient group, although I'd love to hear more about that when they have their own registry, because it's theirs and they can drive it and they own it, and that creates an empowerment to the patient organization itself. And so I understand why that would be true. But if there's 2 or 3 different registries for the same disease, I really think they should overcome that, if possible, and try to find a collaborative way to standardize their data sets and work together, because that will only increase the power and the attractiveness of the data that will come from it.
Well, I can speak to multiple data sets. In Duchenne muscular dystrophy, there are several data sets that are in academic institutions, and so that data is not available to us and is reserved for their use and certainly their publication. So that's one of the reasons we wanted to empower our own patients and start the PRO. There is now another clinical registry that has been launched in 25 different clinical sites. So we're sitting at the table trying to discuss really giving them the Duchenne Connect registry, because we feel like it would be very useful in that the patient can fill out the form. It's curated by genetic counselors. That patient could electronically deliver that to their physician, who could agree or disagree with the data that they've put into the system. So we feel like that would be a terrific data set. And so we're taking baby steps to try to get that accomplished.
We are very fortunate as a young group to be the only group for our disease, and now we're branching out in other countries, and we're encouraging local countries to start their own local groups as partners. But I will say, now that we have a registry, we've heard comments from members that have said, well, there's no way I would break off now because you have the registry. It's an incredible bond, and if there are multiple groups in your disease, I strongly encourage you to play well with others, if for no other project, this one project. It's in the best interest of the patient, and if you're thinking about starting a registry, I encourage you to look around at what other diseases you can collaborate with from the beginning in terms of common data elements. In the end, you really want this to be very mineable data for everybody who's going to need it down the road.
How difficult was it to develop the questions and the common data elements that you use? I mean, it's one of the big issues, I think. The standardized questions or questions that will be applied throughout the disease, throughout the world. You have that problem, you have the language problem that exists. How have you dealt with that as you've gone along?
We've stolen things from other people. In honesty, we went to the established autism groups because that's what we are so closely associated with, and we started with their questions, and then we pared them down, and then we ran them by researchers in the field and said, would these questions glean the data that you would need, and if not, what questions should we ask? And after 2 years, we're going back and reassessing what questions we can take out, what we should add. There weren't as many common data elements available 2 years ago as there are now. And again, if you don't have a registry, I think that's exactly where you start, is with those.
And we did the same. We lifted from the academic institutions, and then we developed an advisory board to include them and to include parents and say, are these the things? Are these the questions that need to be asked? Are these questions worded in such a way that we will get the data that is going to be relevant to the disease? And then we continue to engage them in conversations so that they're willing and available to share other data elements that we might need to collect. So we've had 3 publications on the Duchenne Connect, and we feel like it's a great resource for both academia and industry.
So I would propose that there could be another way to approach it, and that would be to involve the NIH. And I'm sure there would be a sympathetic ear to help organize some of the thinking process that could be standard across many. I mean, demographics, survival, those are pretty common elements, and age to survival, that would be an important starting point that every registry could eventually have if the NIH kind of said, this is what we're all going to collect. But every disease is different in terms of the more specific details, and if there's 2 or 3 or 4 groups, then it might be great to have someone as a third party work together with those 2 or 3 groups to really formulate an advisory group that would be broadly, let's say, nonpartisan.
As nonpartisan,
That's a challenge.
not too bad. As we're finding out, and just as a bit of information, if you go to the NIH's National Library of Medicine, their website, there is a special section on CDE's common data elements that is available to you if you're thinking about developing patient registries. That, as has been indicated, you do run into some difficulties developing standardized questions or even generic questions, and you try to move them into what's considered to be common data elements that everyone's willing to accept. And so we do have on the website this information that we think will continue to be expanded as we go on. There's a tremendous amount of effort. And in fact, part of what we're doing in our pilot project for the Global Rare Disease Registry and Data Repository, we are developing a prototype, a model that is an open source, utilizing open source software that you can just plug and play. Within a few weeks, we hope not too long, we're at the point now that we've developed this with the help of Patient Crossroads to put this together. It will be available, but we're looking for beta testers. We have the documentation, how to retrieve different software packages, how to build a patient registry, how to utilize questions. And so if any of you have an interest, please either go to our website and send us a message, or catch myself or Yafa after the meeting, or anyone else from the Office of Rare Diseases Research. So we do have this, and there's a tremendous effort going on at NIH with respect to the common data elements. Now, we do find that that a lot of the data elements are based on clinical trials, the questions that would normally be asked and presented in clinical trials. So we do want to move out of that. And it sort of leads me into the question for the panel. The value of patient-entered data versus physician-entered data. Have you run into this problem? What do you think? And maybe the audience, if we have enough time later on, can even comment on this, because some heads bobbing up and down and shaking this way and that way and up and down. So we know that there are problems. But I think some of the evidence that has come in, I think Eurodis, Jan and his group, they did some looks at and surveys of data in the patient registries, and they found it pretty good data coming in from the patients. And so any comments that you have? Let's see.
Well, I think there's...
Pat, we're going to start with Pat.
I think there's no one better to input data than patients or family members. They live with the disease day by day. I think it would be hard to argue with their input. And I certainly think a clinician input is helpful, but it might be a bit different. There, for instance, the view of ambulatory or not. And I think that might be a stretch for a parent to input the data about ambulation. But I think most of the data is really going to be quite accurate. And so I really hesitate to imagine that a physician could do better than a patient or a family member.
I feel very strongly about this, and I got a lot of pushback from the research community that parents are not clinicians, and I agree there are certain things, I can't administer an IQ test to my child. But chances are a good clinician probably can't administer an IQ test to my child either, because she's nonverbal and non-cooperative, and she sees a doctor's office and she has a meltdown. So in our patient population, I believe that it's the primary caregiver has the best data. A clinician can't answer how well my child sleeps or how well my child digests or if my child has sensory issues by seeing my child in the clinic. So I understand that I can't administer, clinical tests like MRIs. I get that, but there's an awful lot of information that I can input in the comfort of my own home that I could better, more accurately enter than I could with a screaming child in a doctor's office with him asking me questions. So that's my...
And I think furthermore, our registry is curated. So when it comes to dosage of medicine, genetic testing, all that is validated by a genetic counselor. So I feel like the data is solid and worth considering, very reputable.
I agree. And our genetic report, we require a genetic report from the lab, and that is curated by the genetic counselor. So the parents aren't just, remembering what the diagnosis is.
But when we spoke to some of the academic investigators, what we recognized is they didn't define the terms. For instance, there wasn't a definition of Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So when we looked across, some of the clinical investigators were putting it in as Duchenne muscular dystrophy, DMD, DBMD, dystrophinopathies. So there were 5 different inputs about what this diagnosis was. So that's why I really feel like we really need to first define the terms that we're using and also use parents and educate them about what needs to go in there and curate it.
So from an industry standpoint, if I were receiving the data, I actually do think that patient-reported outcomes are key. And I think it's a fantastic thing. Physicians are very busy people. And one of the things that we've learned over 21 years of maintaining registries is that it's not uncommon we get one data point and then maybe another one 5 years later. But nobody's more motivated to provide a longitudinal record than the patient and the patient's family, certainly, and who has maybe the time to devote to doing it. So I think for patient-reported outcome measures, it's extremely valuable and provides that greater level of longitudinal outcomes. For certain things, though, that you both touched on that are maybe in some ways different and objective and require, is the hemoglobin declining? Is the IQ declining at what rate? Those things, I do think it's helpful to really have a clinician / researcher involved to do it, maybe through curation, which is one nice way to affect some of those things, but also perhaps through direct involvement.
I did want to mention, too, if any of you are not familiar with PCORI, the Patient-Centered Outcome Research Institute, we heard on Rare Disease Day, the conference that we had, that they mentioned that there was going to be a special initiative coming with respect to registries and gathering of information from patients. So we are now into, April 10th or so. So I'm not sure exactly when it's coming, but we will figure out some way to get the information out to all the attendees of the meeting as we go along, too. And we'll also send information about when we have our template ready for developing patient registries for you to check. What are some of the barriers that you ran into, the problems in developing the patient registry, other than money? I mean, things such as questionnaire fatigue, how able were the patients to look at 120 questions, 150, 200 questions, 300 questions? As we know, there's a tendency, wouldn't it be nice to have this information as opposed to what do you really need to know? So have you run into any of these barriers or other problems that you've seen over the years?
We all have probably similar answers, so I'll touch on some of the ones that I feel passionately about. And that is, we were advised that we needed an IRB. We agreed that we wanted to have an IRB. It was not required of a patient-reported registry. But most patient rare disease foundations are run by very passionate, very tired volunteers. And things like IRBs are daunting. And so that is a hurdle that requires some outside advice. And don't let it stop you, but it's something that I believe that there's room for improvement in terms of rare disease and registries and IRBs. Obviously funding, knowing what the questions are, and there is a science to how questions should be asked and how they should be answered. So I do think that you should try and get as much outside advice as you can, do beta testing with the questions. Our patients definitely were overwhelmed by the number of questions, but they did it in fits and spurts, and they were motivated when we lit a fire under them in Facebook and social media. So we overcame, I would say, most of our barriers. It just takes some help.
Megan's right. The barriers that we found were, first of all, sustainability and the initial investment, and then sustainability. Also, the consent forms. We really needed outside help too. What are we consenting these patients to do? What are we going to do with the data? Who has access? We also had to develop an advisory board that would help guide us about that. What if industry wants to know something? How does that, is there a process? What should the process be? Also, do we charge for that, and how does that work? So we had a lot of questions that we were certainly new to the registry, but we knew that the patients were highly motivated and were really willing to participate. Last, I think, and probably not the last barrier we encountered, but the idea of patient fatigue in surveys, because so many people have come to us with a survey about just about everything, and there has to be a limit about how much time these patients and family members, the primary caregiver, is busy enough with a child with Duchenne rather than bombard them with surveys. And we also knew that if we did that too frequently, that they would back off and not participate at all. So it's finding that nice balance to continue the conversation, to continue to empower the caregiver and the patient who's participating, and to make them interested. And lastly, I found that it was really important to tell them what we learned on a regular basis, because so many times I think we ask the patients to give and give and give, but we never say, here's what we learned, here's what we found, here's what we'd like to know. So I probably am the worst pain for the people who run our registry, but I find it's really important to report out to the patients something, at least every quarter. Here's what we're learning, or 10 more people join the registry, something to keep them motivated and say that this has meaning for them and for everyone.
And do you do this through your website or
We do
or
it through our
emails?
websites and emails.
Any problem reported as far as not having access to the web or?
No.
No, okay.
I suspect that there are several different stages of barriers. I think at the beginning you have a different stage. It's sustainability and funding. I think you get to a stage where you actually have companies now interested in providing treatments. That could help remedy funding if it's done right, and could even provide some professional assistance from the companies, at least I would hope so, if they have their interest and guidance as to what they need to see as this moves forward. I would only say that providing information back, in our experience, even in a different stage, is key. Nobody wants to just give data. And simplicity, 300 questions, oh my God, my head hurts myself from just thinking of 300 questions.
I didn't fill them all out, in
Yeah.
in the college boards or the tests and everything.
Well, the truth is what happens is there's an exponential drop
Yeah.
in your useful information, I
remember
think,
those days.
as you move forward, because in the end you just get a mishmash.
Yeah.
But if you focus on getting people to answer 10 questions all the time, consistently, you get a lot better data.
Let me just ask, what have you learned through this whole process? Has it been a useful process? Do you recommend? It's a tremendous amount of work, I realize this, and we're finding this out more and more. It's an amazing amount of work, and I think anybody in the audience who's done this, wow, it's endless. So any takeaway messages before we end and open
It was
up
a
for
game
questions?
changer. It was the best thing our foundation has ever done. It was worth every penny that we scrounged together to do it. I would do it over again, regardless of the time and the pain. And I think the research community has been blown away by what we've been able to get from our families, because they trust us. They wouldn't have responded to the researchers or to industry the way they would do for us. And I've been blown away by how great the families feel about being part of the process. And the biggest surprise was how the patients are using the data. We haven't really released our data to the entire research community. We're just cleaning it up. But our patients are marching into doctors' offices and saying, 60% of our families have silent reflux. You need to run the test, whether you think my child has it or not. Or they're taking the safety issues that we've gotten, and they're going into schools and saying, our children don't feel pain, you need to give them a one-on-one. And so we knew the families would be helpful. We didn't know how helpful the data would be to the families. And I can only imagine what's going to happen when this goes viral with the research community. And I would say the same thing when we started collecting biosamples and attaching the data to the biosamples. The families could not give blood and skin fast enough, and I can only imagine what's going to happen as a result of their generosity. So please don't be scared away by the work.
It was the same for us. It was a game changer to be able to engage the community on that level. It also gives them hope about clinical trials, because we immediately reach out to them and tell them we're able to help recruit to trials better than any advertisement going. I think finally it's allowed us to learn about the community, because in the analysis of what these patients are doing for their children, we've learned that supplements are beneficial, that children in the aggregate that are on supplements are doing better. Now that may mean more than supplements. That may be meaning that their parents are better nutrition, doing stretches more, but it just shows that there is a change in an outcome when there is greater attention to this child and use of supplements. We've learned about kids who wear AFOs at night versus kids who don't wear AFOs, and that is a meaningful difference in their walking ability. So we've learned about the community, and we've also engaged the community in such a way that they're asking brilliant questions and really coming up with new ideas about interventions that might be helpful for the boys. So we found this is a terrific engagement opportunity for the entire community. And I think when you have a rare disease, you feel so isolated and alone. Participating in this registry gives you a greater voice within the community, and certainly there's nothing more hopeful for these patients than directly interacting with companies and clinicians who are trying to help their sons. So we found that very worth the investment, and certainly we are willing to sustain it, and we're hopeful that companies make use of it in terms of post-marketing. So we're trying to really enhance what we do for the community, and I think just seeing how they're using it and how much they're appreciative, it's really been terrific.
I guess I can speak maybe to the post-marketing piece of it then, and I think in 20-some years we've learned also a lot of what works, what didn't work, and I do think that it does cost a lot. I think our registries at Genzyme have cost us well over $50 million, so it's a whole different order of magnitude.
Here's what.
But in the end, for those companies out there, I will tell you, it is an enormously powerful instrument. It's a very powerful way to work with the scientific community and the patient communities. It's also invaluable as a tool for payers and reimbursement agencies to really understand the outcomes that ultimately are produced over a long period of time. It's invaluable to the scientific community. Our registries have now well over 50 publications that have come out of the registry in peer-reviewed journals and innumerable abstracts. While there are lessons to be learned, I can only say they're so worth learning.
First, thank you for your insights. Jan gave me the message, one question from the audience, and I do want to mention too that, we really didn't get into the use of the unique identifier to link up the biospecimen with the patient data. We haven't gotten into data security. We really didn't talk about other models that exist out there. The Cordis group from Sioux Falls, the Sanford Health Group, the private access, the Remedy Informatics, and what Robert Durham is doing, and other folks, and we haven't gotten into these. So I think there are opportunities in other venues to discuss these more and more, and I think you will see many more scientific meetings focusing on the outcomes of patient registries and collection of data. And as Rich mentioned, the publications are going to flow from these registries and natural history studies, because they do make a difference. So I think we have time for one question from the floor, if there is just one. First hand up gets a question. Right here, we have a question. No, or hang on, Andre will bring you the mic.
Hi, I'm Lisa Schill from the Rhistopathies Foundation, and I was just going to say, same with the patient reported outcome measures, that for me as a parent, it would be hard to have one single doctor with my son's disorder. He has about 16 specialists, but they all stay in their little silo, so I don't know where you would go to get all that data.
And that's a nice conclusion, because it does really represent what so many rare disorders, what the patients are confronted with rare disorders. Multiple physicians, multiple clinics, hospitals, multiple hospitalizations, treatments. What do we do? How do we combine all this information? As nice as what we think the medical records are and the information, we know that it's not as good as what we would hope it to be. And I think one last comment, the word was entered into the discussion of trust. I think that is so important as we go along, that we trust each other, we trust the collection of information, and we're going to try to keep it as secure as possible and really utilize it as effectively as what we can to help to improve the lives of the individuals with the rare disorders. So thank you to the panelists for their insights, as powerful as what they are, and you haven't even heard some tremendous thoughts and comments on their expanded presentations. Or if you did, very, very fortunate, because they have some tremendous presentations. And thank you to the audience for staying at this hour. And at nighttime around the tidal basin, if you're not from Washington, if you can take a little stroll, it's beautiful at night. I'd recommend it. So Jan, we'll turn it over to you. And thank you very much. Just have a hand of applause for you.